Hi, I'm Dr Ursula Hackett, author of brilliant essays, your practical guide for university essay writing success. Welcome to my special video series on dissertation writing. This video is about the quality of your dissertation evidence. More evidence is often a good thing, but not always. It's not so much about the absolute quantity of evidence that you gather, but the quality, by which I mean how powerful and persuasive your evidence is in relation to your specific research question. One way to assess the quality of your evidence is to imagine that you were playing devil's advocate and arguing the opposite of what you argue in the dissertation. Ask yourself, how easy would it be to demolish your argument? Where might you pick holes in your own evidence? What's missing? If I were wrong, how would I know? What would the world look like if I were wrong? If I were wrong, would my chosen method actually tell me that I was indeed wrong? For example, imagine you were arguing that US presidential rhetoric had become more emotional since the second Bush presidency, and that your research involved gathering social media posts and analysing them. The least persuasive dissertation on this question would be completely unsystematic. It might just cherry-pick a few examples of particularly emotional tweets. But that wouldn't prove anything. Your imaginary opponent could simply say, well, how do I know whether those tweets are representative of all presidential rhetoric? You need to be alive to the possibility that you could be wrong. US presidential rhetoric might not be getting more emotional. If you only pluck out a few data points that seem to prove your case, you won't persuade your reader. This question requires you to gather a range of data covering an extended period in sufficient quantities to be able to draw generalizable conclusions about how presidential rhetoric has actually changed over time. For instance, you might gather all tweets and other presidential communications that took place during a particular time period and subject them to content analysis, then analyse the results statistically. Now, of course, large-end statistical approaches aren't the only way to persuade your reader. It's all about the match between your method and your question. Let's say you were making a different sort of argument, a conceptual argument about what it really means to act presidential, and that the purpose of your dissertation was to show how presidents use emotion to bolster the symbolism of their Rose Garden events. This sort of question favours a more qualitative approach. It might feature one or more in-depth case studies of presidential Rose Garden events in history. It could draw on archival evidence or interviews to examine the decision calculus that underpins the production of presidential rhetoric. The success of this dissertation would rest on the richness and depth of your qualitative evidence. Your imaginary opponent here might ask whether your new conceptualization of acting presidential is warranted, given the historical facts. Is your account corroborated? Can the evidence be presented in a different way, with a different result? Could there be alternative interpretations? Let's take a look at some other research questions. Why did Brexit Party voters switch back to the Conservatives? Your hypothesis might be that there was a Boris Johnson effect. Brexit Party voters like Boris, and so he was an asset for the Conservatives in winning over that Brexit Party constituency. Have you controlled for rival explanations? Is the result statistically significant? What might the world look like if you were wrong? For instance, what if the Brexit Party vote was simply a protest vote, an aberration, or other events occurred during the time frame in question that caused the switch? Here's another. Why did Russia intervene in Syria? Your hypothesis might be that the proposed gas pipeline was the reason for Russia's Syrian intervention, because it offered financial benefits to Russian interests, so military intervention was required to secure pipeline construction. Again, ask yourself the sceptical questions. Beyond speculation in some newspapers, can we be sure that the pipeline was really a motivation? If we don't have disaggregated airstrikes data, how can we adjudicate between the pipeline explanation and rival explanations, such as regime consolidation motivation? What if you were asking, does gender stereotyping explain women's underrepresentation in politics? Take the sceptical approach. Maybe people don't hold gender stereotypes anymore, or maybe if they do hold them, they don't apply them to candidates. Your response might be, just because overall levels of stereotyping are lower in some contexts, that doesn't mean that they can't be important if specific groups of voters do hold stereotypes and act on them. Your rival hypothesis could be that people evaluate candidates based on competence, not gender stereotypes. Or you might consider the question, is veganism a form of political participation? Is veganism a political statement? And do vegans themselves see it as a political movement? Or is it more about individual lifestyle or health concerns? You'll find out what motivates people to engage in veganism, but what if your survey is not representative of all vegans? Obviously, a lot will depend on where you place the boundaries of political. so very careful theorising is going to be necessary. You need to be able to say precisely what counts and what doesn't count. If anything could be political, then you're not really asserting anything at all. There are many different ways to write a great dissertation. It could be quantitative or qualitative. But whichever methodological approach you take, you must make sure that your method matches your question. Keep asking yourself, what are the weakest parts of my argument? How can I answer the devil's advocate? And what would it take to persuade my reader that what I'm asserting is true?